a red zip-up cardigan, a pair of canvas sneakers, a trolley bell ringing softly in the background. For more than 3 decades, that simple ritual opened the door to one of the strangest, gentlest, and most quietly rebellious shows ever broadcast on American television. When Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood premiered nationally in 1968, nobody expected a soft-spoken Presbyterian minister with hand puppets to become a cultural landmark. But Fred Rogers didn't just make a children's show. He built a small universe where feelings were treated like facts, where silence was allowed to breathe, and where being told, "I like you just the way you are," felt like the safest sentence in the world. Behind that calm exterior, though, was a production full of surprising choices, hidden battles, and quiet acts of courage that most viewers never noticed. Today we're counting down 15 facts about the neighborhood that prove it was never as simple as it looked. Before we get started, if you enjoy deep dives into the television that shaped a generation, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Before there was a neighborhood, Fred Rogers had a front row seat to what children's television usually looked like: fast, loud, and built around jokes at someone's expense. Early in his career, he worked behind the scenes in commercial broadcasting and came away unsettled by how casually the medium treated its youngest viewers. Rather than climb the ladder in an industry he distrusted, he walked toward public television, where budgets were smaller, but the creative control was his own. That decision meant trading a more lucrative path for one built on patience, silence, and unhurried conversation, a gamble that only paid off because he refused to abandon it. In one now famous 1969 episode, Fred Rogers invited Officer Clemens, played by Francois Clemens, one of the first black actors with a recurring role on children's television, to cool his feet in a small plastic pool on a hot day. On the surface, it was just 2 neighbors sharing water, but at a time when integrated public pools were still a flashpoint for real-world hostility across the country, the image of a white host and a black officer calmly sharing the same basin carried enormous weight. Rogers never explained the symbolism on camera. He let the moment simply exist, trusting that showing equality plainly was more powerful than announcing it. The same actor at the center of that pool scene lived with a painful contradiction behind the cameras. Clemens has spoken publicly about being told early in his time on the show to keep his personal life private, out of concern that public knowledge of his sexuality could jeopardize the program's funding and reputation. He stayed for decades anyway, partly because of his bond with Rogers, who later became one of the people who supported him personally even as the show itself couldn't yet be fully public in its acceptance. It's a reminder that the neighborhood's ideals and the realities of the era it aired in didn't always match perfectly. Long before he was swinging through Gotham, Michael Keaton was a young Pittsburgh local trying to break into show business. In the mid-1970s, he took a behind-the-scenes production job on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, handling props and operating the trolley that shuttled viewers into the neighborhood of make-believe. He occasionally stepped in front of the camera as well, appearing in small comic roles. Keaton has since described the experience fondly, recalling Fred Rogers as someone whose on-screen warmth wasn't a performance. It matched who he actually was off-camera. For most of his adult life, Fred Rogers maintained a body weight of exactly 143 pounds, and he did it on purpose. To him, the number wasn't about fitness, it was about arithmetic. 1 letter in I, for letters in love, 3 letters in you. Stepping on a scale became a small daily ritual that reinforced the message he built his entire career around. Decades later, the state of Pennsylvania turned that private joke into something public, designating May 4th as 143 Day in his honor. The image of Rogers swapping his jacket and dress shoes for a cardigan and sneakers is one of the most recognizable rituals in television history, but it started as a technical fix. Studio microphones in the early days of the production picked up every click and squeak of hard-soled shoes on the floor, disrupting quiet scenes. Switching to soft canvas sneakers solved the noise issue immediately. Over time, though, that practical adjustment turned into something symbolic. Children learned that when the shoes changed, it meant this half hour belonged entirely to them. King Friday XII's booming pronouncements, Daniel Striped Tiger's nervous whispers, Lady Elaine Fairchild's chaotic energy. Nearly all of it came from one man. Rather than hiring a full voice cast, Fred Rogers performed the majority of the neighborhood of make-believe's puppets himself, shifting his tone and cadence to bring each personality to life. It wasn't just an efficient production choice. Many who worked with him believed the puppets let him express sides of himself, fear, stubbornness, mischief, that his composed on-camera persona rarely showed directly. Those cardigans weren't costume department creations. Fred Rogers' mother, Nancy, hand-knit them for him for years, continuing a habit that began when he was a child. He wore them on air with visible pride, occasionally showing viewers a photo of her and explaining exactly where the sweaters came from. When Nancy passed away in 1981, the show lost its quiet, homemade supply chain, a detail that reveals how much of the program's warmth was rooted in real family, not wardrobe styling. One of the original sweaters is now preserved in the Smithsonian's collection. In 1963, the Presbyterian Church ordained Fred Rogers, but instead of assigning him to a congregation, church leaders encouraged him to pursue his unusual calling through broadcasting, treating television as a mission field for children's emotional and spiritual well-being. He rarely mentioned religion directly on air. Instead, his ordination shaped the show's underlying seriousness about topics like grief, self-worth, and kindness, treating even the smallest lesson as something worth taking care with. Instead of using pre-recorded stock music, the production employed pianist Johnny Costa and a small jazz trio who played live during tapings for decades. Costa's playful runs, warm chords, and improvised transitions gave the show a musical sophistication almost unheard of in children's programming. Adults who watched closely could hear genuine jazz phrasing woven into a show built for 4-year-olds, a detail most young viewers absorbed without ever realizing what they were listening to. In 1969, facing proposed budget cuts that threatened to get funding for public broadcasting, Fred Rogers testified before a Senate subcommittee. In a calm, unscripted appeal, he described the emotional value his show offered children navigating anger, jealousy, and fear feelings. He argued that deserved a safe space on television just as much as entertainment did. The subcommittee chair, initially skeptical, was visibly moved, and the funding that had been on the chopping block was ultimately preserved. It remains one of the most quietly persuasive moments ever delivered before Congress. Rather than shielding children from difficult news, Rogers frequently used his platform to help them process it. In the early 1980s, amid rising Cold War tension, the neighborhood of make-believe ran a multi-episode arc directly addressing war and fear of conflict. Decades later, in the days following the September 11th attacks, an older and ailing Fred Rogers came out of retirement to record a special message reassuring families and encouraging parents to look for helpers in moments of crisis. He treated hard truths as something children could handle, as long as someone trustworthy helped them through it. Fame never turned Fred Rogers' relationship with his audience into something one-directional. With help from longtime assistant Elaine Lynch, he read and replied to a huge volume of letters from children over the decades, often responding personally to messages that touched on loss, fear, or family hardship. In an era before instant digital communication, that meant real handwritten replies reaching children who had reached out with real problems, a level of individual attention almost unheard of for someone with a national audience. The bright red cardigan became one of the most iconic images in television history. Yet Fred Rogers himself couldn't perceive that color the way viewers did. He lived with red-green colorblindness, meaning the sweater's vivid hue likely appeared muted or uncertain to him. It's a small, almost poetic detail. The visual symbol most associated with his warmth wasn't chosen for how it looked to him at all, but for comfort, continuity, and the fact that his mother had made it. Taken individually, none of these facts sound especially dramatic, but together, they describe a show that consistently refused to follow the rules of the medium it was part of. In an industry built on speed, spectacle, and avoiding anything uncomfortable, Fred Rogers slowed everything down, sat with silence, addressed real fear directly, and insisted that children deserved honesty instead of distraction. He never raised his voice to make his point. He simply kept showing up, cardigan after cardigan, episode after episode, and let consistency do the work that shouting never could. That patient, unglamorous persistence may be the most radical thing about the entire neighborhood. From a segregation-defying pool scene to a congressional testimony, that helped rescue public broadcasting. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood carried far more weight than its gentle exterior ever let on. It's a reminder that quiet, deliberate kindness can be its own form of quiet, deliberate courage. Which of these facts surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments. And if you'd like more deep dives into the classic television that shaped how we grew up, don't forget to like and subscribe before you go.